The city skyline glimmers under the morning sun, glass towers piercing the clouds. Inside the tallest one, Daniel Winters strides through a fortress of steel and light. Early 40s, immaculately tailored, his presence alone makes assistants scatter. Cameras click and doors open before he touches them. Narration flows, steady and reflective. He had everything: power, wealth, a name that echoed in every boardroom. Everything except love. Clipped flashes of memory follow. Elegant restaurants, polished chandeliers, women seated across from him at arranged blind dates. Each time Daniel's eyes harden, his lips tighten, and within minutes he rises, offering only a cold excuse. Some women leave humiliated, others stunned, but all leave rejected. The city begins to whisper, "The untouchable CEO, doesn't he have a heart?" Narration leans forward. Until one night, fate placed him before someone he never expected. The days of Daniel Winters were measured in contracts, profits, and handshakes that shaped entire industries. His empire stretched across continents, his name opened doors, and his presence commanded silence in any room. To the world, he was a man at the peak of life's mountain. But what few ever noticed, what even fewer dared to ask, was the cost of that climb. Behind closed doors, Daniel's world was quiet. Too quiet. The echo of his footsteps across marble floors was often the only sound in his sprawling penthouse. Waiters in Michelin-star restaurants would place delicate plates before him: lobster, caviar, wagyu. Yet he dined alone, staring through the glass at a city that seemed to mock him with its neon heartbeat. He could summon luxury at the snap of his fingers, yet the one thing he could not summon was genuine companionship. To Daniel, relationships had always been transactions. A partnership to leverage power, a bond to secure influence, a marriage to maintain an image. Not love, never love. His cynicism had roots, dark, tangled roots buried in betrayal. Years ago, when he was just a rising executive, he had given his heart to someone who promised forever. She had taken his trust, and when a wealthier man offered more, she had taken that too. The memory left scars he refused to show, but they were there. Etched in the sharpness of his tone, the coldness in his eyes, the practiced detachment he wore like armor. And so each blind date his family arranged was doomed from the start. Beautiful women from old families, influencers with millions of followers, heiresses who measured life in brand names. He would smile politely, but his gaze betrayed him, calculating, searching, judging. The moment he sensed expectation or ambition, the wall slammed down. He would push away his chair, offer a curt farewell, and leave them bewildered. Over time, the city learned the pattern. Newspapers teased him as the unreachable CEO. Socialites whispered that Daniel Winters' heart was made of glass and steel, just like his office tower. But not everyone found it amusing. His board of directors began to worry. "Daniel's stability matters to investors," one cautioned in a private meeting. "A wife by your side shows commitment, continuity." His mother, elegant and proud, pressed harder. "You are Winters' blood. A family without legacy is fragile. You need someone worthy to stand beside you." Their words were not just advice. They were commands wrapped in velvet, pressure disguised as concern. Daniel would nod, his face unreadable. But alone, he would pour a glass of whiskey, sit on his balcony overlooking the restless city, and feel the emptiness gnaw. He could sign billion-dollar deals, silence competitors, and reshape industries. Yet he couldn't silence the question that haunted him in those long hours. What if wealth had bought him walls so high, no one could ever climb them? The paradox of Daniel Winters was brutal, rich beyond measure, admired yet untouched, a man surrounded by people but starved of connection. And still, he convinced himself that he didn't need it. That love was a weakness, a liability he couldn't afford. Better to be alone than betrayed again. But life has a way of breaking even the strongest illusions. One evening, as the city's elite prepared for a grand charity gala at the prestigious Aurora Hotel, Daniel received an invitation he couldn't ignore. The event promised high-profile networking, another stage where appearances mattered. His board expected him to attend. His mother insisted it would be the perfect opportunity to meet a suitable match. Daniel straightened his tie in the mirror, expression as polished as his cufflinks, and reminded himself, it was just another performance. Another evening of empty smiles and hollow toasts. Yet what Daniel didn't know was that this night, beneath the glitter of chandeliers and the weight of expectation, would not be like the others. Because waiting in that hotel ballroom was someone who would not bow to wealth, who would not measure him by title or fortune. Someone who would break through the walls he had spent a lifetime building. And with that, fate quietly shifted the course of Daniel Winter's story. The Aurora Hotel glittered like a jewel that evening. Crystal chandeliers hung high above the ballroom, scattering light across marble floors polished to a mirror's sheen. The air was thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of a string quartet. Guests moved in clusters, powerful men in tailored tuxedos, women draped in silk gowns. The city's elite gathered in one glittering display of wealth and importance. At the center of it all sat Daniel Winters. His suit, cut to perfection, caught every gleam of the chandeliers, his silver cufflinks engraved with the Winters crest. But while others toasted and mingled, Daniel remained detached. He sat alone at a table near the edge of the ballroom, eyes scanning the room with the same cool precision he brought to boardrooms. The music, the chatter, the rehearsed laughter, it all felt hollow. He swirled the wine in his glass, not drinking, not smiling. Cameras flashed discreetly from corners, eager to capture the elusive CEO's presence. And though Daniel's outward appearance was impeccable, his expression betrayed what the room could not see. He did not want to be there. Across the room, weaving silently between guests, was Lily. Mid-20s, she wore the crisp black and white uniform of the hotel staff. Her hair was neatly tied back, her hands steady as she balanced trays of champagne flutes. Unlike the guests, she had no jewels, no glittering gown. What she carried instead was grace, a quiet determination in her steps, a softness in her smile as she served strangers with patience. To most of the elite, she was invisible, just another part of the service. But fate has a way of forcing the invisible into the spotlight. As Lily moved past Daniel's table, a guest abruptly pushed back his chair, causing her to stumble. The tray tilted, glasses clattered, and in an instant, golden champagne cascaded across Daniel's immaculate suit. Crystal shattered against the marble floor, the sound sharp and jarring against the music. The room froze. All eyes turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The orchestra faltered. Everyone knew who she had spilled the drinks on. Daniel Winters, the man whose reputation for icy intolerance was legendary. Lily's face flushed crimson. She bent quickly, fumbling to gather shards of glass, her voice trembling yet steady. "Sir, I am so sorry. It was an accident. Please let me clean this up." Her words were genuine, unpolished. No rehearsed flattery, no desperate attempt to save her job. Just a young woman, mortified yet earnest, trying to make things right. Daniel looked down at her, his jaw tight, eyes narrowing. For years, he had dismissed people with a glance, cut through mistakes with merciless precision. Every guest in that ballroom expected the explosion, his voice rising, his hand waving her away like she was less than the floor she knelt on. But something flickered. In Lily's eyes, wide and shimmering under the chandelier light, there was no calculation, no agenda. Just sincerity, humility, vulnerability, qualities Daniel had almost forgotten existed. For the first time in years, the mask cracked. He spoke, voice quieter than anyone expected. "It's fine." A ripple went through the crowd. Fine? That was not the Daniel Winters they knew. Lily froze, her hands trembling as she held a broken stem of glass. She looked up at him, startled by the absence of anger. Daniel leaned back slightly, dabbing his suit with a napkin. His gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, as though studying a puzzle. Why hadn't she groveled like the others? Why did her apology feel different? The music hesitantly resumed, guests returning to their conversations, though whispers traveled quickly. What just happened? Did he forgive her? Lily gathered the last of the shards, nodding quickly. "Thank you, sir. I'll be more careful." Her voice wavered, but her sincerity was undeniable. Daniel did not reply immediately. Instead, he watched her retreat into the crowd, weaving between tables, disappearing back into her world of trays and unspoken labor. And yet, unlike the dozens of women whose faces he had forgotten the moment he walked away, hers lingered in his thoughts. For the first time in years, Daniel Winters felt curious. Narration lowered like a whisper. Instead of dismissing her, something in him shifted. For the first time, he was not repelled by a mistake. He was intrigued by the person who made it. And in that quiet, fragile moment, the walls Daniel had built around his heart trembled, though neither he nor Lily knew it yet. The gala pressed on, but for Daniel, the champagne spill refused to fade into the background. He should have been furious, humiliated even, stained in front of investors, whispered about by rivals. Yet instead of anger, there was only curiosity. From his corner table, Daniel's gaze followed Lily as she moved about the ballroom. She was everywhere and nowhere, weaving through clusters of laughing elites, balancing trays with effortless grace. Most guests barely acknowledged her presence, their conversations too grand, their egos too inflated. To them, she was furniture in motion, useful but unseen. But Daniel saw. He saw the way she smiled at an elderly woman when pouring water, bending low to hear her soft thanks. He saw her gently steer a new waiter away from a mistake, whispering guidance without embarrassment. He saw her pause near the orchestra pit, tapping her foot lightly to the rhythm as though music, while serving others, still belonged to her. Something about her presence unsettled him. Not because she sought his attention, on the contrary, she seemed determined to avoid his eyes, but because she moved with an ease he had long forgotten, an ease that wealth couldn't buy. When Lily approached his table again, balancing a tray of hors d'oeuvres, Daniel spoke without thinking. "You don't look afraid of me." She stopped, startled. Her eyes met his for a brief second, then flicked away. "Should I be?" Daniel's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. People usually scrambled to appease him, showering him with polished compliments, desperate to stay in his good graces. Lily, however, treated the question like it was ridiculous. "Most people are," he replied evenly, leaning back in his chair. She set the tray down, her movements steady. "Then maybe they don't really see you, they just see your title." The words were quiet but sharp enough to cut. Daniel studied her face. She wasn't being insolent, there was no mockery, no attempt to impress. It was simply her truth. "And you?" he asked, his voice lowered, edged with curiosity. "What do you see?" Lily hesitated, then shrugged lightly. "A man who doesn't look like he wants to be here." The answer was disarming. For years, people had pretended to know him, to interpret his moods in ways that suited their ambition. Yet this waitress, with no reason to flatter him, had seen straight through the polished armor. Daniel tilted his head, testing her resolve. "You speak boldly for someone in your position." Her gaze returned to his, steady, unflinching. "And you listen, which surprises me, for someone in yours." For a moment, silence stretched between them, layered with unspoken tension. Around them, glasses clinked, laughter roared, but in that instant, the noise faded into background haze. Finally, Lily cleared her throat and adjusted the tray. "I should keep working." Daniel let her go, but his eyes followed her again, tracing every movement. He wasn't used to being dismissed, at least not so gently, not by someone who had nothing to gain from him. That alone made her unforgettable. Later that evening, as the gala reached its crescendo, Daniel found himself wandering near the service corridor. He told himself he was looking for fresh air, an escape from hollow conversations, but the truth lingered beneath. He wanted another glimpse. And there she was, Lily, leaning briefly against the wall, taking a moment to breathe before plunging back into the chaos. She rubbed her wrist, tired from hours of balancing trays, then straightened when she noticed him. "You shouldn't be back here," she said, her tone cautious but calm. "And yet here I am," Daniel answered smoothly. Lily crossed her arms lightly. "Most guests don't care about what happens behind the curtain. They just want the show to go on. Daniel's brow furrowed, intrigued. You make it sound like you're part of a performance. In a way, I am. She gestured faintly toward the ballroom. They see chandeliers and champagne. They don't see the hours of polishing silver, ironing tablecloths, or the staff running themselves ragged. My job is to make sure they never think about it. Her honesty was startling. Daniel, who had spent his life commanding masks and performances, recognized the weight of her words. She was invisible by design, and yet in her invisibility lay a kind of dignity he hadn't encountered before. You carry it well, he said after a pause. Lily gave a small, surprised smile, just a flicker, and it struck him harder than any compliment he had ever received. Thank you, she murmured before excusing herself back into the crowd. Daniel remained in the dim corridor, a strange tightness in his chest. For years, women had tried to impress him with elegance, intellect, or beauty, but none had disarmed him with simplicity. None had dared to treat him as simply a man, not as a prize, a headline, or a stepping stone. That night, as the gala finally ended and the last carriages rolled away, Daniel stood by the tall glass windows, watching Lily clear the tables with quiet diligence. She didn't notice him this time. She was too focused on her work, too committed to finishing what she had started. The city lights shimmered outside, reflected in the glass, but Daniel's attention was fixed inward. Her presence lingered in his thoughts, echoing louder than the orchestra's music, more persistent than the flash of cameras. For the first time in years, Daniel Winters left an event not thinking about profits or reputation, but about a hotel waitress whose honesty had unsettled the fortress of glass and steel he called a heart. And as his car pulled away into the night, narration whispered. The night ended, but the impression did not. For the first time, Daniel carried someone home in his thoughts. 3 days later, Daniel Winters walked through the grand, revolving doors of the Aurora Hotel once more. On paper, he was there for a business lunch, a casual meeting with a minor investor. That was what his assistant's calendar showed. But Daniel knew the truth. He wasn't there for contracts, he was there for her. The restaurant bustled with its usual symphony of clinking silverware and low conversation. Daniel requested a table in the far corner, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made staff scramble. Then came the subtle request, delivered with effortless charm. Have the same waitress from the gala serve me, please. The maitre d', startled, nodded and hurried away. Daniel's reputation was not one to question. Minutes later, Lily appeared, balancing a notepad and tray. She paused when she saw him, surprise flickering across her face. You again. Daniel allowed himself the smallest smirk. I suppose fate enjoys repeating itself. She raised a brow. Or maybe you just like expensive hotels. The banter was light, but Daniel felt something shift. Few dared speak to him with such ease. She took his order, a simple coffee, nothing extravagant, and lingered just long enough to add. You know, most people who come here order meals worth a week of my paycheck. You're the first CEO I've seen settle for plain coffee. Daniel studied her. Maybe I wanted something real for once. Her gaze softened briefly, then she turned to leave. When she returned with his cup, their exchange deepened. Lily placed the coffee down carefully. You know, money can buy a lot of things, cars, suits, even respect if that's what you're after. But it can't buy time, not real time, not moments with people who care whether you're Daniel Winters or just Daniel. The words landed heavier than she realized. For years, Daniel had lived surrounded by people who cared only for Mr. Winters, never Daniel the man. And here was a waitress, earnest, unpolished, reminding him of something he had buried beneath layers of wealth. He leaned forward slightly, his tone softer than before. And you, who truly cares for you. Lily smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. My little brother, he's in school. I work double shift so he can stay there. He doesn't care how many tables I serve. He just cares that I come home. Silence lingered, rich with unspoken truths. For the first time in years, Daniel felt his armor crack not with anger but with warmth. That evening, when he returned to his penthouse, Daniel poured a drink but found himself staring into the glass, distracted. His family noticed in the following days, his mother watching his faraway expression at dinner, his sister teasing that he finally looked human again. But beneath the questions and suspicions, one truth remained. Daniel had made a choice. He had returned to the hotel not for business but for her. And the thought of her lingered long after he left. The glossy front page of a financial magazine screamed in bold letters, "Billionaire CEO Daniel Winters caught dining with hotel waitress." Paparazzi photos, grainy yet damning, circulated across every screen. In boardrooms, whispers echoed. On social media, memes multiplied. The untouchable CEO had become a headline not for a business merger, but for a woman's society deemed unworthy of his orbit. At the Winters estate, silence reigned until Daniel's mother broke it with a voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Daniel, you've humiliated this family. A Winters does not consort with staff." Her eyes burned with both fury and fear, the fear of legacy tainted. Daniel stood unmoved, jaw clenched, but his silence betrayed the storm inside. For years, he'd been the man who never explained himself. Yet now, with Lily, he felt the instinct to defend. Still, words stuck in his throat. Meanwhile, across town in the hotel's modest break room, Lily faced her own trial. Her co-workers' laughter was cruel and casual, the kind born from envy. "Enjoy it while it lasts," one sneered, stacking plates. Another smirked. "Maybe he'll tip you with a diamond ring." The sting was sharper than she expected. She had never sought Daniel's attention, yet now she was painted as a climber reaching above her station. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart heavy, wondering if she'd unintentionally stepped into a world that could crush her. Back in his office fortress, Daniel stared out at the skyline, the city's lights flickering like judgmental eyes. He knew the stakes. Shareholders thrived on stability and tabloids devoured scandal. The safe move would be to retreat, issue a polished statement, erase Lily from his orbit like she had never existed. But then came the memory, her steady gaze when glass shattered at the gala, her words echoing in his mind. "Money can't buy time with people who truly care." For the first time, the man who built empires realized he was standing at the edge of a choice far greater than any business deal. Would he protect his image or fight for something real? The ballroom glowed with opulence, crystal chandeliers spilling light across polished marble, the air buzzing with the laughter of investors and socialites. It was the kind of evening where appearances weren't just important, they were currency. And for Daniel Winters, the cost of misstep was immeasurable. At the far end of the table, Lily stood discreetly, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. She hadn't expected to see him here, not after the storm of gossip, but when her eyes met his across the room, her heart betrayed her, leaping before she could remind herself of the chasm between their worlds. Whispers erupted the moment Daniel acknowledged her presence. A board member leaned toward his wife, murmuring with a smirk, "There's the waitress." The words spread like wildfire, barbs of mockery dressed in polite laughter. All eyes turned toward him, waiting to see what the CEO would do. Lily approached with steady grace, setting a glass in front of him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The air between them charged, as if the chandelier above dimmed to spotlight only the two of them. But then Daniel's mask slipped back on, the cold, untouchable facade that had shielded him for decades. He leaned back in his chair, his voice sharp and dismissive, echoing louder than he intended. "I don't know why she keeps showing up where she doesn't belong." The words cut deeper than any silence could. Gasps fluttered across the table. A few guests chuckled uncomfortably, relishing the spectacle. Lily froze, tray trembling in her hands. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no sound came. Instead, she steadied herself, lifted her chin with quiet dignity, and walked away. Every step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached the service corridor, her vision blurred with unshed tears. In her mind, it was confirmation of everything she had always believed, that men of power saw women like her as disposable, entertainment until the next distraction came along. She promised herself then, with silent fury, never again. Never again would she allow her heart to be vulnerable to wealth and its cruelty. Back inside, the dinner carried on, but Daniel couldn't hear a word. Laughter became noise, glasses clinking became static. He stared at the empty space where Lily had stood, his chest hollow. For years, he had been accused of being heartless, and for years it had never bothered him. Tonight, for the first time, he felt the weight of the label, heavy and suffocating. He had saved his reputation, silenced whispers, preserved the image his world demanded. Yet as he looked down at the untouched champagne before him, the taste of victory was ash on his tongue. The billionaire who had everything suddenly realized he had nothing. The city stretched before Daniel's penthouse windows like a kingdom he no longer wanted to rule. Contracts stacked neatly on his desk, invitations to more blind dates buzzing on his phone, each one a reminder of the emptiness he had chosen over vulnerability. But Lily's eyes haunted him. The look of betrayal, of dignity preserved even as her heart broke, was sharper than any insult he had ever endured. For the first time, Daniel wasn't angry at the world. He was ashamed of himself. He poured a drink untouched and sank into the silence. Memories surfaced unbidden. A younger Daniel watching his father storm out, briefcase in hand, leaving behind a tearful mother and promises that money fixes everything. From that night onward, Daniel had built walls of steel around his heart, convinced that attachment was weakness, that love was fleeting. And yet Lily's words echoed, "Money can't buy time with people who truly care." A montage unfolds, Daniel ignoring texts from his mother demanding explanations, canceling dinners with women chosen by his board, sitting in the back of his car, staring out at the rain instead of barking orders. The man who once devoured power now starved for something gentler, truth. One night the weight became unbearable. He left his office without telling a soul. No entourage, no car, just himself, a dark coat, and the rain that soaked him as he walked through unfamiliar streets. Each step stripped away a layer of his pride. Finally, he stood at the door of a modest apartment building, water dripping from his hair, suit clinging to his frame. He hesitated. This was no gala, no boardroom. It was her world, not his, and he had shattered it. When Lily opened the door, surprise froze her features. Her eyes darted to the hallway, half expecting cameras or bodyguards. But there was only Daniel, breathless, vulnerable, and smaller than she had ever seen him. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough. "Not just about you, about everything. I thought keeping my distance made me strong, but all it's made me is empty." Lily crossed her arms, her silence heavier than anger. She had every reason to close the door. Yet Daniel didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Instead, he let the rain speak for him, his soaked figure a confession of its own. "I don't want wealth to define me anymore," he whispered. "I want someone who sees me, and you did, even when I tried to push you away." Her resolve wavered. The sincerity in his eyes, raw, unguarded, wasn't the mask of a CEO. It was the truth of a man desperate to be forgiven. And for the first time, Daniel Winters wasn't untouchable. He was human. The grand hall shimmered with opulence, string quartets playing beneath chandeliers, glittering gowns brushing across marble floors, champagne glasses raised in polished hands. It was the annual Winters Foundation charity ball, the event where reputations were cemented and power was displayed in subtle glances across gilded tables. And at its center, all eyes turned to the man they had been waiting for, Daniel Winters, every inch the commanding CEO. Yet tonight, something about him was different. He wasn't flanked by board members or veiled in aloofness. Instead, at his side walked Lily, dressed simply yet radiantly, her presence causing a ripple of murmurs that quickly grew into waves of disbelief. "Is that her?" someone whispered. "The waitress," another gasped, almost scandalized. But Daniel held her hand firmly, guiding her through the sea of judgment without flinching. For once, he wasn't concerned with whispers. He was ready to silence them, not with denial, but with truth. When he stepped onto the stage, the crowd hushed. He had delivered countless speeches about profits and projections, but never had his voice carried this weight. For years, Daniel began, his tone steady, I believed success was measured in numbers, revenue, acquisitions, the size of one's empire. And I told myself that love was unnecessary, a distraction. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before softening toward Lily. But I was wrong. A collective intake of breath echoed across the hall. The man who had rejected dozens of blind dates was about to shatter the myth of his untouchable heart. Gesturing toward Lily, he continued, This is Lily. She is not here tonight as an employee of this hotel. She is here as the woman who taught me what love truly means. Not love bought by wealth, not love arranged by convenience, but love chosen, freely, humbly, and truthfully. The silence that followed was electric. Some faces registered shock, others disapproval, but many more unexpectedly softened with admiration. Lily's cheeks flushed, her instinct to shrink from the spotlight battling with the warmth of his words. Yet when Daniel reached for her hand again, she didn't pull away. Instead, she met his eyes and found no trace of the mask that once defined him. A smattering of applause broke the stillness, hesitant at first, then swelling as those with hearts willing to understand rose to their feet. The image of the billionaire CEO standing unashamed beside a hotel waitress burned itself into memory, a story that would ripple far beyond those walls. As the music resumed, Daniel leaned closer, whispering just for her. No titles tonight, not CEO, not waitress, just us. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Winters didn't feel untouchable. He felt complete. The camera pulls back from the glittering ballroom, the noise of applause fading into a softer, more timeless rhythm, the steady sound of footsteps. Daniel and Lily walk side by side, their silhouettes framed by golden light as they slip quietly from the stage into the crowd. For the first time, there are no titles, no roles, just two souls choosing one another. Narration begins, warm and resonant. Wealth can buy 1,000 luxuries, but it cannot buy love. Status can silence a room, but it cannot quiet the ache of loneliness. In the end, it is not the power we hold over others that defines us, but the courage we show when we choose truth over appearances. Images drift across the screen, a younger Daniel sitting alone in his glass tower, then the same man now smiling, unguarded, as Lily squeezes his hand. The stark contrast tells the story without words. Money had once been his armor, but humanity became his salvation. True connection, the narration continues, often comes from the places we least expect it. And when we dare to see each other not as titles, not as wealth or status, but as human beings, that is where love is found. The final shot lingers on Daniel and Lily disappearing into the night crowd, indistinguishable from anyone else. No longer a CEO and a waitress, but simply a man and a woman, proof that even the most powerful hearts still need kindness to heal. Because love, the narration concludes, is never bought, it is chosen. Fade to black.